They say the dead can't hear. They're wrong. I heard every word from the darkness of my coma, the steady beeping of machines, the cold hum of fluorescent lights, and my sister's voice, soft and triumphant, whispering to my husband. She's gone, Mark. The baby is ours now. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw my way out of the body that had become my coffin, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but listen as my husband kissed my sister right beside my hospital bed, their laughter mixing with the rhythm of my heart monitor. They thought I was brain dead, a vegetable, a convenient obstacle finally removed. What they didn't know was that I heard everything, including my mother-in-law's phone call about selling my second son, my fragile little Ethan, to strangers for $80,000. For 29 days, I lay paralyzed in darkness while they celebrated on my grave. On day 29, I opened my eyes. And that's when I began planning their destruction. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you would have died for? My name is Natalie Holmes. I'm 35 years old, a senior estate planning attorney in Austin, Texas, and for most of my life, I've been the person everyone else leaned on. I thought that was love. I thought that was family. I was wrong. Let me take you back to where it all began. Not the hospital bed where I lay trapped in darkness, but 17 years earlier when I first learned what it meant to sacrifice everything for someone who would one day try to destroy me. I was 18 when our mother died of ovarian cancer. Emily was 13, still a child, still needing someone to braid her hair and check her homework and tell her everything would be okay. Our father had walked out years before, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and a forwarding address we never used. So when the doctors told us Mom was gone, I looked at my baby sister's tear-streaked face and made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I deferred my acceptance to Cornell. I took a night job at a diner and weekend shifts at a law office. I became mother, father, and sister all at once, pouring everything I had into making sure Emily never felt the abandonment that had shattered our family. And Emily learned something from those years. She learned that my love had no limits. She learned that tears could open any door, that vulnerability was the most powerful weapon a woman could wield. She learned to take. At 22, she accidentally started dating my college boyfriend. When I confronted her, she cried so hard she couldn't breathe. "I didn't know you were serious about him," she sobbed. "Please don't hate me." I forgave her. At 25, she borrowed $30,000 for a business venture that never materialized. The money vanished. I never asked for it back. Now at 30, Emily works in public relations, a career built on managing perceptions, on making people see exactly what you want them to see. She's very, very good at it. I just never realized she'd been practicing on me her entire life. Then there was Mark. He came into my life 5 years ago at a legal conference, charming, successful, with a smile that made me feel seen for the first time in years. He pursued me with a focus that felt like devotion. He bonded instantly with Emily, treating her like the little sister he'd never had. He really cares about family, I told my best friend Amelia. He understands how important Emily is to me. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, were the late nights that started 6 months into our marriage. The whispered phone calls he'd end abruptly when I entered the room. The inside jokes between him and Emily that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Once I walked into the kitchen and saw his hand resting on the small of her back. They stepped apart too quickly. I told myself it meant nothing. I needed it to mean nothing. But some part of me knew. That's why 6 months into my pregnancy with our twins, I quietly established a trust, naming Amelia as emergency guardian. I updated my will without telling Mark. I installed a voice recording app on my phone, telling myself it was for client meetings. When Amelia asked why I was being so thorough, I said, "I just like having a backup plan." I couldn't explain the unease that kept me awake at night, the instinct whispering that something was deeply wrong in my own house. 2 nights before my due date, I woke at 2 a.m. and heard Mark's voice drifting from the living room, low, intimate, tender, in a way I hadn't heard in months. "She doesn't suspect anything, oh," he said. "After the babies come, we move to the next phase, just like we planned." A pause, a soft laugh. "I love you too, Em." I stood frozen in that hallway, my hands pressed against the wall, my heart shattering silently in my chest. And then I did what I had always done. I told myself I was wrong. I went back to bed. I pretended to sleep when he slid in beside me. But my hands didn't stop shaking until morning. The next morning, I told myself I had imagined everything. I made breakfast, smiled at Mark, and pretended my world wasn't crumbling. 2 days later, my body made the decision my mind was too afraid to face. I collapsed in the kitchen with pain like lightning shooting through my skull. The last thing I remember before the darkness is Mark's face above me, and even through the agony, I noticed something strange in his expression. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. I woke up in hell, not the fire and brimstone kind, but something far worse. A prison made of my own flesh. The doctors called it a persistent vegetative state. They were wrong. I was in there fully conscious, fully aware, and completely unable to move or speak or scream. Severe preeclampsia had forced me into emergency labor at 32 weeks. My twin boys were born while I lay dying on the operating table. Lucas came out small but fighting. Ethan, my second son, was critically fragile with respiratory distress syndrome, struggling for every breath in the NICU. And me, I suffered a massive hemorrhagic stroke during delivery. The doctors told my family I would probably never wake up, and if by some miracle I did, I would have severe brain damage. They spoke about me like I was already gone. But I heard every word. I screamed inside my mind, and no sound came out. I tried to move my fingers, my toes, anything, and nothing responded. I was buried alive in my own body, and no one knew I was still there. The first week was a blur of beeping machines, hushed conversations, and footsteps coming and going. I learned to track time by the shift changes, by the quality of light. I could barely perceive through my closed eyelids, by the voices that floated in and out of my room. Mark visited every day, playing the devoted husband for the staff. Emily came too, always with him, always touching him when she thought no one was looking. I felt her hand brush his. I heard their whispered words, but it wasn't until day 8 that I learned the full truth of what I was to them. Emily came alone that afternoon. She sat beside my bed, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she started to cry. Not the pretty tears she used as weapons, but ugly, ragged sobs that shook her whole body. And then she started talking, confessing. Because why not? I was just an empty shell, a vegetable who would never repeat her secrets. 4 years ago I was pregnant, she said, her voice cracking. Mark's baby. We were already together then, Natalie. Before he ever met you. I lost it at 14 weeks. The doctors said I'd never conceive again. Something about scarring, about damage. I was supposed to be a mother. That baby was supposed to be mine. She laughed bitter and broken. So we made a plan. Mark would find someone who could give us what I couldn't, someone trusting and desperate enough to believe he actually loved her. She paused, and I felt her hand on mine, cold and foreign. You were perfect, Natalie. Successful, lonely, so hungry for love you couldn't see what was right in front of you. And you share my DNA. The babies would be partly mine in a way. Mark's children, with my sister's genes. It was almost poetic. She squeezed my lifeless hand. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but you understand, don't you? You always gave me everything I wanted. This is just one more thing. I cannot describe what it feels like to have your entire life revealed as a lie while you lie paralyzed and voiceless. My marriage was a scheme. My husband had never loved me for a single day. My sister had used me as a breeding tool. Everything I believed about my family, my future, my worth as a human being died in that hospital room, while my heart kept beating against my will. But the nightmare was only beginning. On day 12, Mark came with another man, Dr. Samuel Vance. I learned a physician whose ethics could be purchased for the right price. They stood at the foot of my bed and discussed my future like I was furniture. Dr. Vance would sign documents stating I showed no higher brain function and no reasonable chance of meaningful recovery. With his medical opinion, Mark was filing a petition for emergency legal guardianship. Not just medical decisions, but full legal control over my person, my assets, and my children. The hearing was set for day 42. And if she somehow wakes up? Mark asked. Dr. Vance chuckled. Then we argue the stroke caused permanent cognitive damage. Either way, you win. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to rise up and claw their eyes out, but I could only lie there a prisoner in my own skull listening to them plan my legal death. Day 15 brought a new horror. Mark's mother, Helen, visited while Mark and Emily were away. She didn't bother speaking to me. Why waste words on a corpse? Instead, she took a phone call right there in my room, assuming I couldn't hear or understand. The healthy one goes to Mark and Emily, she said, her voice casual, businesslike. The other one, the one in intensive care, I've found buyers. 80,000 cash. We tell everyone he didn't survive the complications. My mind screamed. Ethan. My fragile fighting Ethan. She continued, irritated by something the other person said. Don't get sentimental. That baby will drain resources for years. Special needs therapy, endless medical bills. I'm doing everyone a favor. Besides, I need that money fast. You don't want to know what happens if I don't pay what I owe by the end of the month. She was going to sell my son. My mother-in-law was planning to sell my newborn baby to strangers for $80,000 to pay off her gambling debts, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing except lie there and scream silently into the void. Then came Margaret. She appeared on the night shift on day 16, and from the first moment she was different. Margaret Chen, 58 years old, a veteran nurse who spoke to me like I was a person, not a diagnosis. She held my hand and talked about her day, about the weather, about her garden. She told me about her daughter, lost 20 years ago to a hospital's negligence, a misdiagnosis. A young life ended because no one was paying attention. I swore I would never look away again, she said softly. And I don't know why, but something about you makes me think someone needs to be paying attention. She noticed things the other nurses missed. The slight change in my heart rate when Emily's voice filled the room. The finger that seemed to twitch when Mark mentioned the hearing. She started keeping notes in a personal journal. On day 18, she leaned close and whispered, I don't know if you're in there, sweetheart. But if you are, don't give up. Someone sees you. I see you. On day 19, Mark stood over my bed, scrolling through his phone, with one hand holding Emily's hand with the other. 23 more days, he said. Then the judge makes it official. Legal guardianship, control of assets, custody of both boys. He glanced at Emily. Well, one boy after Mom handles the other situation. Emily's voice was soft. Are you sure about that? About Ethan? Mark shrugged like he was discussing a broken appliance. He's defective. He'll be someone else's problem. Focus on Lucas. He's the one that matters. Then they kissed right there beside what they thought was my corpse. After they left, silence filled the room. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in 19 days. My finger moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm, a choice. I had 23 days to rise from the dead, and I intended to use every single one. That small movement of my finger was the beginning of everything. It took every ounce of strength I had, but it proved what I desperately needed to know. My body was not completely lost. Somewhere beneath the paralysis, I was still fighting. The next night at 3:47 in the morning, I opened my eyes. The room was dim and quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Margaret was there, adjusting my IV line with the gentle efficiencies that had become familiar to me over the past days. When she turned and saw my eyes open fixed on her face with clear intention, she froze. I watched emotions cascade across her face. Shock, disbelief, then something like wonder. I knew I had only seconds before she might call for doctors, before alarms would be raised, and my one advantage would be lost. With enormous effort, fighting muscles that had forgotten how to obey, I raised one finger to my lips, the universal sign for silence. Margaret stood absolutely still for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. She understood. She had heard enough bedside confessions over these past weeks to know something was deeply wrong in this room, with these visitors, with this situation. She moved closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You heard everything, didn't you? I blinked twice. Yes. Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to escape. I knew it, she breathed. I knew you were still in there. I could feel it. She squeezed my hand, and I felt the warmth of human connection for the first time since waking in this nightmare. What do you need? She asked. Tell me what you need. Speaking was impossible. My throat wouldn't cooperate. My tongue felt thick and foreign. But I concentrated with everything I had and mouthed one word, one name, the person I trusted more than anyone left in this world. Amelia. Margaret became my lifeline. She contacted Amelia discreetly, explaining only that she needed to come to the hospital urgently, that it involved me, that secrecy was essential. And then began the performance of my lifetime. Over the following days, my body slowly began responding to my commands. I could move my fingers, then my hands. I could turn my head slightly. I could open and close my eyes at will, but I hid every improvement. When the physical therapists came, I gave them minimal response. When the doctors evaluated me, I let my eyes drift unfocused, my expression slack. They documented exactly what I wanted them to see: persistent vegetative state with occasional reflexive movements, no meaningful recovery. When Mark and Emily visited, I gave them the empty shell they expected. I lay motionless while they stood over me, discussing their plans with the casual confidence of people who believed they had already won. Mark told Emily the neurologist's assessment. He said even if she somehow wakes up, she'll have the mental capacity of a child. We're completely in the clear. Emily smiled that beautiful smile I had loved my entire life. Perfect, she said. They had no idea that behind my vacant stare I was cataloging every word, every name they mentioned, every date, every detail of their scheme. I was building a case that would destroy them, and they were handing me the evidence gift-wrapped. Amelia came to the hospital posing as a concerned friend, checking on legal documents. The staff thought nothing of it. A lawyer visiting her lawyer friend handling paperwork. But in truth, Amelia brought me back from the dead. She recovered my phone from my personal belongings, the phone with the recording app, still containing everything it had captured before my collapse. The conversation I overheard between Mark and Emily the night before my labor. Other discussions that had happened in my hospital room before the battery finally died. But the recordings were only the beginning. Amelia had been busy in ways I never could have imagined. She had already consulted with a criminal attorney. She had formally requested all visitor logs from the hospital. She had filed carefully worded legal inquiries that would later support subpoenas for Mark's emails. Most importantly, she had submitted a motion to be recognized as my designated healthcare agent based on the trust documents I had prepared months earlier. A motion Mark knew nothing about. "The recordings help," Amelia whispered during one of her late-night visits sitting close to my bed in the darkness. "But what I found in their emails is going to bury them." 5 years of planning Nat. 5 years. They documented everything. They were so confident you'd never find out that they left a paper trail a mile long. Every discussion about finding the right candidate. Every message about keeping you happy until the babies came. Every single detail of how they planned to take your children and push you out. By day 35, I could walk short distances with support. I practiced at night when the ward was quiet, Margaret standing guard at the door. During official evaluations, I remained the helpless vegetable everyone expected, but in secret I was growing stronger, and Amelia was building an arsenal. The evidence portfolio she assembled was devastating. Voice recordings from my phone establishing the affair and conspiracy. Email correspondence between Mark and Emily spanning 5 years, obtained through an emergency court order based on fraud allegations. Testimony from Dr. Marcus Webb, an independent neurologist who examined me privately and confirmed I had full cognitive function. Margaret's detailed observation journal documenting every suspicious conversation she had witnessed. Financial records showing payments from Mark to Dr. Samuel Vance, the corrupt physician who had agreed to falsify my medical evaluation. And separately, Amelia had contacted the FBI regarding Helen's phone conversations about selling Ethan. Her tip connected to an ongoing federal investigation into black market adoption rings. They were already building a case. Helen had no idea she was being watched. Everything was in place. We were not waiting for day 42 for Mark's guardianship hearing. We were waiting for my resurrection. The night before the hearing, Mark visited alone. He sat beside my bed in the dim light and took my hand, the hand that had signed our marriage certificate, the hand that had touched his face with what I thought was love, the hand that would soon sign documents ending everything he had built on lies. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," he said softly, his voice carrying that tender quality I had once found so irresistible. "You were a good wife, a good person, really." He paused, stroking my hair with something that almost resembled genuine affection. "But Emily is my soul. She always has been. You were just necessary." He leaned down and kissed my forehead like he was saying goodbye to someone already dead. "Tomorrow the judge will grant me guardianship, and then we can finally stop pretending." He stood, looked at me one last time, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. I kept my eyes closed until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. Then I opened them and stared at the ceiling, my mind clear and cold and ready. Tomorrow, I thought. Yes, Mark. Tomorrow everything ends. But not the way you think. Not even close. I barely slept that night. Not from fear, but from anticipation. For 41 days I had been a prisoner. A corpse. A thing to be disposed of. Tomorrow I would rise from the grave they had dug for me, and I would watch their world collapse. The courthouse was busy at 9 in the morning. Lawyers hurrying through hallways, clerks carrying stacks of files, ordinary people waiting for their ordinary cases. No one noticed the woman walking steadily toward courtroom 3, flanked by her best friend and 2 attorneys. No one knew that a resurrection was about to take place. I took my seat at the respondents' table and waited. My heart was calm. My hands were steady. I had played the role of helpless victim for long enough. Now it was time for the final act. The doors opened and Mark walked in. He was confident, relaxed, wearing his most expensive suit. Why wouldn't he be confident? His corrupt doctor had provided the testimony. His petition was airtight. His brain-dead wife was lying in a hospital bed, and in less than an hour, he would have complete control over everything she owned, including her children. He walked toward the petitioner's table, glanced casually at the respondent's side, and stopped. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. I sat there upright and alert, looking directly at him with clear, focused eyes, not in a wheelchair, not staring blankly, very much alive, very much aware. I smiled at him, a cold and precise smile that contained 5 years of lies reflected back. "Good morning, Mark," I said, surprised to see me. He couldn't speak. For the first time since I had known him, Mark was completely without words. His attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Mark just stood there, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. In a way, he was. The judge entered, and the hearing began. But it was not the hearing Mark had expected. My attorney stood and presented a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition based on fraudulent medical testimony and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence was introduced piece by piece. The voice recordings from my phone capturing Mark and Emily discussing their plan. The emails spanning 5 years documenting every step of their conspiracy in their own words. The financial records showing payments from Mark to Dr. Samuel Vance in exchange for falsified medical evaluations. Mark's attorney objected, demanded time to review, claimed this was an ambush that violated his client's rights. The judge looked at the email transcripts, and I watched his expression shift from professional neutrality to visible disgust. He denied every motion. He ordered Mark to remain in the courtroom. He sent officers to bring Emily in from the car where she was waiting to celebrate. When Emily walked through those doors and saw me sitting there, she screamed. Actually screamed, like she had seen something impossible. In her mind, she probably had. The sister she had used and discarded the woman she had watched lie motionless for weeks while she planned to steal. Her children was sitting there whole and alive and looking at her with eyes that held no warmth at all. They brought her to stand beside Mark. For the first time in our lives, my sister and I faced each other with nothing between us but truth. Emily started to cry. Of course she did. It was her oldest weapon, the tool she had used to manipulate me since childhood. "Natalie, please," she sobbed. "You don't understand what I went through. I lost a baby. I was broken. I was so broken. I just wanted to be a mother. I just wanted what you had. Please, you have to understand." I let her finish. I let her tears fall and her voice crack and her shoulders shake with practiced grief. Then I spoke, and my voice did not waver. "You wanted what was mine," I said. "You've always wanted what was mine. My boyfriend when you were 22. My money when you were 25. My husband. My children. My life." I stood up and she flinched like I might strike her. "Here's what you don't understand, Emily. I would have given you a kidney if you needed it. I would have carried a baby for you if you had asked. I loved you that much. You were my sister, and there was nothing I wouldn't have done for you." My voice hardened, and I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "But you didn't ask. You didn't come to me with your pain and your loss and ask for help. Instead, you schemed. You manipulated. You used my husband to seduce me into a fake marriage so you could steal the children from my body. You treated me like an incubator with a heartbeat." I turned to Mark, who stood frozen beside her. And you. You never loved me, not for one single day of our marriage. Every time you said, "I love you," it was a line from a script. Every kiss was a performance. I was just the necessary inconvenience standing between you and what you really wanted. I gathered my papers and looked at them both one last time. I'm done being your supporting character. This is my story now. The legal consequences unfolded over the following months, and I made sure I was present for every moment of it. Mark was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, because his emails crossed state lines and subordination of perjury for his arrangement with Dr. Vance. His real estate license was permanently revoked. At his sentencing, the judge spoke for 10 minutes about the calculated exploitation of a vulnerable pregnant woman and the systematic conspiracy to deprive a mother of her children. 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. I watched them lead him away in handcuffs, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Emily's trial was longer. Her attorneys argued diminished capacity, claiming the trauma of her miscarriage had driven her to desperate actions. They painted her as a victim of grief, manipulated by Mark, not truly responsible for her choices. The prosecution presented the 5 years of emails, the methodical planning, the careful selection of me as their target. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. Her public relations career ended the moment her mugshot appeared on every local news website. At sentencing, the judge noted that as the conspiracy's architect, she bore primary responsibility for the scheme. 9 years in federal prison. She cried when they read the verdict. She was still crying when they led her away. I did not cry at all. Dr. Samuel Vance lost his medical license and faced charges for falsifying medical documents. 3 years in prison plus a permanent bar from ever practicing medicine again. A small price for helping to steal a woman's children, but it would have to be enough. Helen's case took longer. The FBI connected her phone communications to an established trafficking network they had been investigating for years. 3 months after my confrontation with Mark and Emily, federal agents arrested Helen at her home on charges of conspiracy to traffic a minor. She was 63 years old, 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Given her age, she will die behind bars. The grandmother who tried to sell her own grandchild for $80,000 will never breathe free air again. 2 weeks after the final sentencing, I sat in a conference room signing divorce papers. I got the house, which I planned to sell immediately. I got full custody of Lucas and Ethan, which was never in question after the trials. Mark's parental rights were terminated based on his criminal conviction. He will never have any legal claim to his sons. As I signed the last page, Amelia squeezed my shoulder. "It's over," she said. I looked at her, at this friend who had saved my life and my children and my sanity. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning. The hard part, learning to live again, that starts now." That night, I went to the hospital to bring Ethan home. He had been in NICU care for 5 months, fighting every single day, growing stronger, despite every odd stacked against him. The nurse placed him in my arms, this tiny warrior. This boy Helen had called defective. This child she had tried to sell for the price of her gambling debts. He looked up at me with eyes that held no knowledge of betrayal or conspiracy or evil, just trust, just need, just love, waiting to be given and received. I held him close and whispered into his tiny ear, "I've got you, Mommy's got you, and no one is ever going to take you from me again." That promise I whispered to Ethan in the hospital became the foundation of everything I built afterward. It took time. It took patience. It took learning how to live again when everything I thought I knew had turned to ash. But 14 months later, I can finally say that I am not just surviving. I am alive. I live in a 3-bedroom cottage in the hill country now, about 40 minutes outside Austin, close enough that I can still work when I need to, far enough that the city and all its memories feel like another lifetime. The house has a wraparound porch where I drink my coffee at sunrise while the boys are still sleeping. I watch the light creep over the hills and listen to the birds and feel something I couldn't name for a long time. Eventually, I realized what it was. Peace. Not happiness exactly, not the kind that comes from having everything you want, but the deep, quiet peace that comes from knowing you have built something real with your own hands from the ruins someone else left behind. Lucas and Ethan are 18 months old now, and they are thriving. Lucas is bold and loud, already trying to climb everything he can reach, already convinced the world belongs to him. Ethan is quieter, more watchful, but no less determined. He spent his first 5 months fighting for every breath in intensive care, and the doctors warn me he might face developmental delays. He will need speech therapy, they say, possibly some additional support as he grows. I don't care. Every milestone he hits is a victory against everyone who wrote him off. Every word he learns, every step he takes is proof that the boy his grandmother called defective is stronger than any of them ever imagined. I work as a legal consultant now, all remote, all on my own schedule. I make less money than I did at the firm. I have more life than I have ever had before, but recovery is not a straight line. I still carry scars that no one can see. The stroke that nearly killed me left damage that the doctors say may never fully heal. I get headaches when I'm tired, sudden and sharp, like a reminder that my brain almost died in that delivery room. Sometimes words escape me mid-sentence, hovering just out of reach while I grasp for them. I see a therapist every 2 weeks, a kind woman who never judges, who lets me work through the betrayal and the trauma, and the complete reconstruction of everything I thought I knew about my own history. The hardest part, I told her once, isn't what they did. The hardest part is accepting that the family I thought I had never existed. I spent 30 years loving a fiction. My sister was never my sister, not really. My husband was never my husband. The life I thought I was building was just a stage set, and I was the only one who didn't know we were performing. Some nights I still wake up gasping, dreaming that I'm back in that hospital bed, paralyzed, voiceless, listening to them plan my erasure while I scream inside my own skull. The nightmares are less frequent now, but they haven't stopped completely. Maybe they never will. But every morning I wake up to 2 small voices calling for me from the next room. Mama, Mama, and that is enough. That is everything. The family I have now is small, but it is real. Margaret retired from nursing a few months after everything happened. She lives 15 minutes away in a little house with a garden she's been meaning to plant for years. She comes over every Sunday with homemade tamales and stories about what she calls her grandmother privileges. She's not their grandmother by blood, but blood stopped meaning anything to me a long time ago. She saved my life. She saw me when everyone else looked right through me. That makes her family in every way that matters. Amelia is the boys' godmother, their fierce Auntie Mia, who spoils them with toys and threatens to destroy anyone who ever hurts them. I believe her. I have seen what she can do when someone she loves is in danger. I have a small circle now, people I trust, with the truth of who I am and what I survived. A neighbor who watches the boys sometimes when I need adult conversation. A single mother from the twins playgroup who understands exhaustion and resilience in equal measure. A therapist who helps me untangle the knots that 35 years of misplaced love left behind. Family isn't blood, I have learned. Family is who shows up at 3 a.m. when you're falling apart. Family is who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. Mark writes letters from federal prison. Monthly at first, then weekly as his appeals failed one by one. He asks for photos of the boys. He requests video calls. He begs for a chance to explain, to make me understand, to tell his side of the story. I read the first letter, then I set up a filter that sends the rest directly to my attorney unopened. I don't respond. I don't owe him closure. Emily's letters are worse. Long, rambling confessions that alternate between self-pity and blame. You don't understand what it's like to lose a baby. If you had just let me be part of their lives, none of this would have happened. You were always Mom's favorite anyway. I read one, recognized the manipulation I had missed for 30 years, and deleted the rest unread. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something I owe anyone. It's something I might give myself someday permission to stop carrying their weight. But I don't owe them anything. Not explanation, not absolution, not a single moment more of my life. On the anniversary of the day I woke up, I sat on my porch and wrote in my journal. For 35 years, I believed that love meant sacrifice. That being a good sister, a good wife, a good person meant giving until I was empty and calling the emptiness virtue. I confused being needed with being valued. I confused silence with peace. I let people mistake my kindness for weakness, my patience for permission, my love for something they were entitled to rather than something they had to earn. Never again. I am not less kind now. but I am no longer willing to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. I am not less loving now, but I know that love without boundaries isn't love. It's an open wound. Last night I put the boys to bed and stood in their doorway watching them sleep. Lucas sprawled across his mattress like he owns the world. Ethan curled tight, one hand reaching toward his brother even in dreams. I thought about the woman I was 2 years ago. The woman who ignored her instincts because she wanted so badly to believe. The woman who loved a husband who was never hers, a sister who was never real, a family that existed only in her desperate imagination. I thought about the woman I am now, scarred, tired, stronger than I ever knew I could be. They declared me dead. They divided my children. They built their future on my grave. But graves are just gardens that haven't bloomed yet. Here I am alive, awake, surrounded by the only family that matters. I don't think about revenge anymore. I don't have time. I'm too busy living. But sometimes, late at night, I allow myself a small private smile. Because somewhere in a federal prison, Mark is lying on a thin mattress, staring at a ceiling, knowing that the woman he buried is out here, free, thriving, raising the sons he will never hold again. That's not revenge. That's just the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is enough. Natalie's story carries lessons that every woman should hear, no matter her age or circumstances. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Natalie noticed the red flags, the whispered calls, the strange intimacies between her husband and sister, but she convinced herself to ignore what her gut was telling her. Our instincts exist to protect us. Listen to them. Second, always have a backup plan. Natalie's decision to establish a trust, to name a guardian, to keep that recording app on her phone, these small acts of preparation saved her children and her future. Hope for the best, but protect yourself from the worst. You are not being paranoid. You are being smart. Third, know the difference between love and obligation. For 35 years, Natalie gave everything to people who only knew how to take. She confused being needed with being valued. Real love doesn't drain you empty. Real love fills you up. If someone in your life only reaches out when they need something that's not family, that's exploitation. Fourth, forgiveness is not a debt you owe anyone. Natalie chose not to forgive Mark and Emily, and that was her right. You do not have to make peace with people who tried to destroy you. Your peace matters more than their comfort. Finally, remember this: they can try to bury you, but that doesn't mean you have to stay in the ground. You are stronger than you know. You have survived everything life has thrown at you so far, and you will survive whatever comes next. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. We share stories of strength, resilience, and justice every week. Stories about women who refuse to be silenced. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you find your way back to yourself? Your story matters, and we would love to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are always enough.